Welcome to the Dark Wilderness, where we explore first-hand encounters with the unexplained. If you've had a story you would like to share, please email it to me in the link below. If you like today's story, please gently slap that like button, and I'll be uploading 3 to 5 times every week. So don't forget to smash that subscribe button so you can be alerted every time I release new content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. This is actually one of my personal encounters, and it happened last year during the archery season. Me and my cousin were hunting just north of this little town called Alma out in Eastern Manitoba. It's actually right on the border, more or less, of the Whiteshell Provincial Park. So the area we were hunting is this little area called Scotts Hill. And it's an area I've hunted quite a few times in the past, but I've always been with one of my uncles. Last year was actually the first year that I had my own permission to hunt that property. So as soon as we found out that I had permission and my cousin had permission, we really hit the ground running hard. We had our trail cam set up at the end of June. We were going out there every weekend to check on different cams, pull the cards, basically just trying to find out what's in the area and try to pattern the deer's movements. End of August was the start of archery season, and the first couple weeks were great. We saw tons of deer. We never had any run-ins with bears or wolves. We actually did hear a couple of elk calls, so that was actually pretty cool because that's typically an area where elk usually are not. Well, it was about the third week of archery. It was a Saturday morning. We got there at about 3:30 in the morning, so it's still full on dark. And where we have to park is down this gravel road. It runs about a half a mile and then it turns and heads north. Right where it turns, there's a little gravel pit. So we normally park our vehicles there and then we'll walk into wherever we're going on the property. So where we park, there's a fence line that runs from west to east. And that fence line runs about a half a mile. And there's another fence line that runs from north to south. And that one also runs for a half a mile. So that half mile and that half mile, that makes up the southwestern quarter of this guy's property. And that's the main area we were really hunting this time of year, just because we had the most deer movement on camera. The deer in the area were the most predictable. We had the pattern pretty much to a T. So this particular morning, I was going to be hunting my tripod stand. My tripod stand is located along that fence line that runs from north to south. So it's not too far from where we park. It's about a 300-meter walk. My cousin, though, he was going to be hunting a stand that we had set up over by a water hole. Where this water hole is actually, if you were to go to diagonal line from where we park to the far end of that quarter, it is right there. So the only way to get into that area would be to walk that fence line that goes from west to east till you got to the end, and then you would turn and you would follow another fence line for another half a mile to the end, and then the stand's right around there. My cousin that morning, he wasn't really feeling the walk by himself. It's not a horrible walk, but there is one section where it just really closes in. And during a gun season, it's not too much of a concern, but when you're walking through the bush with just a stick and string, especially if it's something you're not overly used to, it could be a little intimidating. And my cousin, he's a lot younger than me. He's actually my cousin's son. So he has not been hunting for 30 years like I have. So that morning he kept asking me if I could walk him in. Most times I probably would have had a problem saying yes right off the hop. But my leg was killing me that morning and I wasn't really feeling like walking pretty much 2 miles because I'd have to walk that fence line with him, the next fence line, come back, and then back this way. So I kept telling him, no, you're okay. You'll be fine. Just take a flashlight, right? Like, you're going to be good. I even actually offered him my bear spray. I kind of started to feel bad after a little while, though, so I decided, you know what? I'll walk with you, man. I'll just go, instead of sitting in my tripod, I'll just sit by the point of the bush, about 400 yards away from where he was. I saw tons of deer there on a camera, so I was like, you know what, I'll just sit there, it's fine. So he was pretty happy that I was going to walk him in, because now he didn't have to walk through that real tight part all by himself. So We grabbed our gear. We started walking away from the vehicle. And right away, I could kind of feel something was off. In the quarter section just north of the spot where we normally hunt, there's a bunch of cows. There's probably about 75 head of cattle. And typically, every morning we had gone out, they were always close towards that sand pit. This particular morning, they were all on the far side of the property, and they were all huddled together. And there's a donkey in with the cows, because a donkey will actually ward away coyotes. And that donkey, every morning, as soon as he would see us, he would just lose his mind. And donkeys can be pretty loud. I've been hunting a long time, and I've never hunted in an area with a donkey. So last year, the first time I heard that donkey, it kind of almost stopped my heart for a second, because he was about 20 yards away from me, and I didn't even see him. Anyway, that donkey was even being quiet. I couldn't even tell where he was. But I was like, oh, whatever, we'll just keep going. So we start walking down this cut, and for the first half of that cut line, there's field on both sides, and then you'll get to a bush line, and it's pretty thick for the last quarter mile. So we're walking, and we're getting up towards that bush line. And I can tell that on this side, everything was quiet. Even on the other side, it was pretty quiet, but you could hear some activity off in the distance. You could hear some crickets, you could hear the odd tweet of a bird, which typically they normally don't do that at night, but they'll do it sometimes. So I was a little on edge, and I always wear a headlamp when it's dark and I'm walking into a spot, but I never keep my light on white light. If you have your light on white light, it stands out like crazy. You could just end up spooking deer with it. So when I do have it on, I'll typically have it on red light, and that way too it doesn't mess with my night vision. So I can see a lot better if I don't put that white light on. For some reason, after we were about 200 yards past the end of the bush line, walking towards the end of that cut, I decided for some reason I was going to click that headlight onto white light. So I turned it on white light. We're walking pretty slow, because even though we're pretty far away from where we were going to be hunting, we still didn't want to make a ton of noise. We didn't want to spook anything, just because if you bump a deer too many times in one area, they're going to completely change their patterns, and they might not come back for a very long time. So even though we were hunting in that spot, we're going to be way on the other side of the property, we still didn't want to spook anything up. So we keep walking. I'm scanning with my head left and right, just to be safe. So we're going, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see eye shine. And it's probably about 4.5 feet off the ground. And the eyes were probably spaced about that far apart, a good 5.5 inches or so. So I quickly put my arm out and grab my cousin. I'm like, dude, eyes. He's like, where? I'm like, point over there. So he's looking, he's like, what is it? I'm like, I don't know. And I could tell by the eyes, because they were forward facing and not on the sides, that it was some type of predatory animal, whether it was a bear, cougar, or a wolf. At that point, I couldn't tell. All I could tell was these are forward facing eyes, they're pretty spaced out. This is a definite predator. We got to be alert. So we're looking at these eyes, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what it is. So just to be on the safe side, I kind of let out a, hey bear. Doesn't even flinch. So, okay, keep watching it. Yell out again. I'm like, hey bear. Nothing. My cousin now, he starts yelling too. So now there's both of us, we're yelling. We're going, hey bear, hey bear. This thing's not flinching at all. My cousin turns his headlamp on. He's actually getting his bow ready because he's getting pretty nervous. So we're yell again, hey bear. Now the eyes look like they slinked all the way down to the ground. They just went down and then they were gone. No sound, no nothing. Couldn't hear this thing move. Didn't hear it move out of the area. Nothing. So I kind of keep my eyes focused where the eyes were. And I'm getting my bear spray ready. I actually kind of holding my bow on my shoulder while I have my Bowie knife in my left hand and my bear spray now in my right. All of a sudden, those eyes that were originally 4.5 feet off the ground, they come back, and they slowly raise to about 7.5 feet. I can't see a body. I don't see an outline of anything from where I am. And this thing's only about 25 yards away, if that. Like, it was pretty close. So we're yelling at this thing now. We're screaming at it. I don't really care now if I spook a deer. All I know is there's a big animal that's not taking off, and there's two of us yelling at it. So we keep yelling at this thing. And also my cousin goes, "It's an effing cat." Well, so instantly I'm like, okay, we cannot turn our backs on this thing, because cougars and mountain lions, large cats, they'll usually attack from behind. They'll come from behind the prey, they'll grab onto the back of the neck, and they'll try to sever that spinal column, and that's how they'll take their prey down. So I told my cousin, I'm like, dude, I got an LED flashlight in my backpack, bottom pocket, can you grab it? So he pulls it out for me. It's just a little tiny LED strip, but it's super bright, and it's got a little like pen clip on the back. So I turned that on and actually clipped it onto the back of my hat. My cousin says, "What are you doing?" I'm like, well, if this is a cat, maybe if I have this on the back of my hat, it's gonna think that that's eyes, so it's not gonna attack us from behind. I'm like, let's just stick together. You know what? We're gonna head back to the vehicles, and we'll just go hunt on the other side of the property. So my cousin's like, "Hey, I'm good with that. Let's just go." So he starts walking pretty quick, and I had to actually tell him, "Dude, slow down. If you move too quick, we're going to trigger this thing's prey drive, and then for sure it will attack." So we had to slow down, and we just kept walking. I kept looking behind me to make sure that that thing didn't get closer. So we're walking down this cut, and now we had about 350 yards of the bush to walk through before we got to those two fields. And that entire time, as we're walking down that cut, this thing stayed about 20 yards behind us, just inside the tree line. That cut line is probably about 15 yards wide, and there's actually a bit of a mound right in the middle. And that's where the property owner drives his quad up to his different fences so he could check his cattle fences. So we were walking on that mound on our way out, and there's a little divot and then the tree line. That thing was just inside the tree line, about 20 yards behind us, paralleling us the entire way till we got to the end of that bush. As soon as we got to the end of the bush, never saw the eyes again. We ended up going straight to the car, and then we ended up going over to the tripod, and I ended up sitting in the tripod. My cousin went about 200 yards further and sat in my hanging stand. Now, I don't want to say this wasn't a cat, but typically a large cat's eye shine will be a yellowish green. These eyes were more of a whitish blue, which is typically more common in a canine species like a wolf or a coyote. Now, there are some pretty large timber wolves in Manitoba. There's been a couple massive ones that have been shot and trapped out by Birds Hill Park, and there have been some pretty big ones out in the Whiteshell. I've actually have had quite a few run-ins with wolves. I'll share those stories a different day, but this thing was massive, whatever it was. I never saw any outlines. All I saw were the eyes. My cousin said that the ears were pointed, which is something else that's not common with a cat. Cat ears tend to kind of be more rounded, whereas a canine species, like wolves as such, they'll be more pointed. So whatever that was following us through the bush, probably never know. I did go back and look for tracks, but last year was so dry that everything was just cracked and dry, solid ground. So it was really hard to pick up any form of tracks. Even if I saw a big buck go across some of that mud, they wouldn't even leave a track. So I guess this is just one thing that I'm never going to have an answer to as to what exactly this animal was. Whatever it was, though, it was definitely creepy. Definitely not an experience that I've had often while hunting, and definitely an experience I do not want to have again. Well, And that's it for today's encounter. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.